This is Mr. B reads J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and we're going to start with the incredible work of The Fellowship of the Ring, arguably one of the best books ever written. This story series is aimed at our older children in years 4, 5 and 6, and we're going to enjoy listening with it to the incredible soundtrack from the films, the music of Howard Shore. So sit back and enjoy the wonderful work and music of Lord of the Rings.
J.R.R. Tolkien's The Fellowship of the Ring, Book 2, Chapter 1, Many Meetings. Frodo woke and found himself lying in bed. At first he thought that he had slept late after a long and pleasant dream that still hovered on the edge of memory. Or perhaps he'd been ill, but the ceiling looked strange. It was flat, and it had dark beams richly carved. He lay a little while longer, looking at patches of sunlight on the wall and listening to the sound of a waterfall. "Where am I, and what is the time?" he said aloud to the ceiling. "In the house of Elrond, and it is 10 o'clock in the morning," said a voice. "It is the morning of October the 24th, if you want to know." "Gandalf!" cried Frodo, sitting up. There was the old wizard, sitting in a chair by the open window. "Yes," he said, "I am here, and you are lucky to be here too, after all the absurd things you have done since you left home." Frodo lay down again. He felt too comfortable and peaceful to argue, and in any case, he did not think he would get the better of an argument. He was fully awake now, and the memory of his journey was returning. The disastrous shortcut through the woods, the accident at the prancing pony, and his madness in putting on the ring in the dell under Weathertop. While he was thinking of all these things, there was a long silence, broken only by the soft puffs of Gandalf's pipe as he blew white smoke rings out of the window. "Where's Sam?" Frodo asked at length. "And are the others all right?" "Yes, they are all safe and sound," answered Gandalf. "Sam was here until I sent him off to get some rest, about half an hour ago." "What happened at the ford?" said Frodo. "It all seemed so dim somehow, and it still does." "Yes, it would. You were beginning to fade," answered Gandalf. "The wound was overcoming you at last. A few more hours and you would have been beyond our aid. But you have some strength in you, my dear hobbit. It is no small feat to have come so far and through such dangers still bearing the ring." "We should never have done it without Strider," said Frodo. "But we needed you. I did not know what to do without you." "I was delayed," said Gandalf, "and that nearly proved our ruin. And yet I am not sure, it may have been better so. I wish you would tell me what happened." "All in good time. You are not supposed to talk or worry about anything today, by Elrond's orders." "But talking would stop me thinking and wondering, which are quite as tiring," said Frodo. "I am wide awake now, and I remember so many things that want explaining. Why were you delayed? You ought to tell me that at least." "You will soon hear all you wish to know," said Gandalf. "We shall have a council as soon as you are well enough. At the moment I will say only that I was held captive." "You?" cried Frodo. "Yes, I, Gandalf the Grey," said the wizard solemnly. "For the moment we have been saved from disaster by Aragorn. But there are few left in Middle-earth like Aragorn, son of Arathorn. The race of the kings from over the sea is nearly at an end. It may be that this War of the Ring will be their last adventure." "Do you really mean that Strider is one of the people of the old kings?" said Frodo in wonder. "I thought they had all vanished long ago. I thought he was only a ranger." "Only a ranger!" cried Gandalf. "My dear Frodo, that is just what the rangers are, the last remnant in the north of the great people, the men of the west. They have helped me before, and I shall need their help in the days to come, for we have reached Rivendell, but the ring is not yet at rest." "I suppose not," said Frodo. "But so far my only thought has been to get here, and I hope I shan't have to go any further. It is very pleasant just to rest. I have had a month of exile and adventure, and I find that has been as much as I want." He fell silent and shut his eyes. After a while he spoke again. "I have been reckoning," he said, "and I can't bring the total up to October the 24th. It ought to be the 21st. We must have reached the ford by the 20th. "You have talked and reckoned more than is good for you," said Gandalf. "How did the side and shoulder feel now?" He made an effort. "I can move my arm a little. Yes, it is coming back to life. It is not cold," he added, touching his left hand with his right. "Good," said Gandalf. "It is mending fast. You will soon be sound again. Elrond has cured you. He has tended you for days, ever since you were brought in." "Days?" said Frodo. "Well, 4 nights and 3 days to be exact. The elves brought you from the ford on the night of the 20th, and that is where you lost count. We have been terribly anxious, and Sam has hardly left your side, day or night, except to run messengers. Elrond is a master of healing, but the weapons of our enemy are deadly." "Still," he said, standing suddenly up and sticking out his chin, while his beard went stiff and straight like bristling wire, "we must keep up our courage. You will soon be well, if I do not talk you to death. You are in Rivendell, and you need not worry about anything for the present." "I haven't any courage to keep up," said Frodo, "but I am not worried at the moment. Just give me news of my friends and tell me the end of the affair at the ford, as I keep on asking, and I shall be content for the present. After that I shall have another sleep, I think, but I shan't be able to close my eyes until you have finished the story for me." Very well, Gandalf said. I will risk a brief tale without consulting Elrond, but quite brief, mind you, and then you must sleep again. This is what happened, as far as I can gather. The riders made straight for you as soon as you fled. They did not need the guidance of their horses any longer. You had become visible to them, being already on the threshold of their world, and also the ring drew them. Your friends sprang aside off the road, or they would have been ridden down. They knew that nothing could save you if the white horse could not. The riders were too swift to overtake and too many to oppose. On foot, even Glorfindel and Aragorn together could not withstand all the 9 at once. As the ring wraiths swept by, Glorfindel and Aragorn followed as quickly as they could. They knew that if the Black Riders tried to cross the ford, a flood would come down and crush them in their path. And that is exactly what happened. The Black Riders were carried away by the first assault of the flood, and they and their horses disappeared into the waters. "And is that the end of the Black Riders?" asked Frodo. "No," said Gandalf. "Their horses must have perished, and without them they are crippled, but the ring wraiths themselves cannot be so easily destroyed. However, there is nothing more to fear from them at present. Your friends crossed after the flood had passed, and they found you lying on your face at the top of the bank. The horse was standing guard beside you. You were pale and cold, and they feared that you were dead, or worse. Elrond's folk met them, carrying you slowly towards Rivendell." "Who made the flood?" asked Frodo. "Elrond commanded it," answered Gandalf. "The river of this valley is under his power, and it will rise in anger when he has great need to bar the ford. As soon as the captain of the ringwraiths rode into the water, the flood was released." "Yes, it all comes back to me now," said Frodo. "The tremendous roaring. I thought I was drowning with my friends and enemies and all. But now we are safe." Gandalf looked quickly at Frodo, but he had shut his eyes. "Yes, you are all safe for the present. Soon there will be feasting and merrymaking to celebrate the victory at the ford of Brunnen, and you will all be there in places of honour." "Splendid," said Frodo. "It is wonderful that Elrond and Glorfindel should take so much trouble and show me so much kindness." "Well, there are many reasons why they should," said Gandalf, smiling. "You are the ring-bearer, and you are the heir of Bilbo, the ring-finder." "Dear Bilbo," said Frodo sleepily. "I wonder where he is. I wish he was here and could hear all about it. It would make him laugh." And with that, Frodo fell fast asleep. Frodo was now safe in the last homely house east of the sea. That house was, as Bilbo had long ago reported, a perfect house. Whether you like food or sleep or storytelling or singing, or just sitting and thinking best, or a pleasant mix of them all. Merely to be there was a cure for weariness, fear and sadness. As the evening drew on, Frodo woke up again, and he found that he no longer felt in need of sleep or rest, but had in mind for food and drink, and probably for singing and storytelling afterwards. He got out of bed and discovered that his arm was already nearly as useful again as it had ever been. Looking in a mirror, he was startled to see a much thinner reflection of himself than he remembered, but the eyes looked out at him thoughtfully. "Yes, you have seen a thing or two since you last peeped out of a looking-glass," he said to his reflection. "But now for a merry meeting." He stretched out his arms and whistled a tune. At that moment there was a knock on the door and Sam came in. He ran to Frodo and took his left hand awkwardly and shyly. He stroked it gently and then blushed and turned hastily away. "Hello, Sam," said Frodo. "Your arm's warm," said Sam. "I mean, your hand, Mr. Frodo. It has felt so cold through the long nights." "But glory and trumpets," he cried, turning round again with shining eyes and dancing on the floor. "It's fine to see you up and yourself again, sir. Gandalf asked me to come and see if you were ready to come down. I thought he was joking." "I am ready," said Frodo. "Let's go and look for the rest of the party." "I can take you to them, sir," said Sam. "It's a big house, this, and very peculiar. Always a bit more to discover, and no knowing what you'll find round a corner. And elves, sir, elves here and elves there. Some like kings, terrible and splendid, and some as merry as children." Sam led him along several passages and down many steps and out into a high garden above the steep bank of the river. He found his friends sitting in a porch on the side of the house looking east. "Hooray!" cried Pippin, springing up. "Here is our noble cousin. Make way for Frodo, Lord of the Ring." "Hush!" said Gandalf from the shadows at the back of the porch. "Evil things do not come into this valley, but all the same we should not name them. The Lord of the Ring is not Frodo, but the master of the dark Tower of Mordor, whose power is again stretching out over the world. We are sitting in a fortress. Outside it is getting dark." "Gandalf has been saying many cheerful things like that," said Pippin. "He thinks I need keeping in order, but it feels impossible somehow to feel gloomy or depressed in this place. I feel I could sing if I knew the right song for the occasion." "I feel like singing myself," laughed Frodo, "though at the moment I feel more like eating and drinking." "That will soon be cured," said Pippin. "You have shown your usual cunning in getting up just in time for a meal." "More than a meal, a feast," said Merry. "As soon as Gandalf reported that you were recovered, the preparations began." He had hardly finished speaking when they were summoned to the hall by the ringing of many bells. The hall of Elrond's house was filled with folk, elves for the most part, though there were a few guests of other sorts. Elrond, as was his custom, sat in a great chair at the end of the long table upon the day, and next to him on one side sat Glorfindel, and on the other sat Gandalf. Frodo looked at them in wonder, for he had never seen Elrond, of whom so many tales were spoken, and as they sat upon his right hand and his left, Glorfindel and even Gandalf, whom he knew so well, were revealed as lords of dignity and power. Gandalf was shorter in stature than the other two, but his long white hair, his sweeping silver beard, and his broad shoulders made him look like some wise king of ancient legend. In his aged face, under great snowy brows, his dark eyes were set like coals that could leap suddenly into fire. Glorfindel was tall and straight, his hair was of shining gold, his face fair and young and fearless and full of joy. His eyes were bright and keen, and his voice like music. On his brow sat wisdom, and in his hand was strength. The face of Elrond was ageless, neither old or young, though in it was written the memory of many things both glad and sorrowful. His hair was dark as the shadows of twilight, and upon it sat a circlet of silver. His eyes were grey as a clear evening, and in them was a light like the light of stars. Venerable he seemed as a king crowned with many winters, and yet hailed as a tried warrior in the fullness of his strength. He was the Lord of Rivendell, and mighty among elves and men. In the middle of the table, among the woven cloths upon the wall, there was a chair under a canopy, and there sat a lady fair to look upon, and so like was she to Elrond that Frodo guessed that she was one of his close kindred. Young she was, and yet not so. The braids of her dark hair were touched by no frost, her white arms and clear face were flawless and smooth, and the light of stars was in her bright eyes. Grey as a cloudless night, yet queenly she looked. So it was that Frodo saw her, whom few mortals had yet seen, Arwen, daughter of Elrond. Though he had a suitable chair and was raised upon several cushions, Frodo felt very small in comparison and rather out of place. But that feeling quickly passed. The feast was merry and the food all that his hunger could desire. It was some time before he looked about him again or even turned to his neighbours. Next to Frodo on his right sat a dwarf of important appearance, richly dressed. His beard, very long and forked, was white, nearly as white as the snow-white cloth of his garments. He wore a silver belt, and round his neck hung a chain of silver and diamonds. Frodo stopped eating to look at him. "Welcome and well met," said the dwarf, turning towards him. Then he actually rose from his seat and bowed. "Gloin at your service," he said, and bowed still lower. "Frodo Baggins at your service and your family's," said Frodo correctly, rising in surprise and scattering his cushions. "Am I right in guessing that you are the Gloin, one of the 12 companions of the great Thorin Oakenshield?" "Quite right," answered the dwarf, gathering up the cushions and courteously assisting Frodo back into his seat. "And do I not ask, for I have already been told, that you are the kinsman and adopted heir of our friend Bilbo the Renowned? Allow me to congratulate you on your recovery." "Thank you very much," said Frodo. "You have had some very strange adventures, I hear," said Gloin. "I wonder greatly what brings 4 hobbits on so long a journey. Nothing like it has happened since Bilbo came with us, but perhaps I should not inquire too closely, since Elrond and Gandalf do not seem disposed to talk of this." "I think we will not speak of it, at least not yet," said Frodo politely. "But I am equally curious," he added, "to learn what brings so important a dwarf so far from the lonely mountain." Gloin looked at him. "If you have not heard, I think we'll not speak yet of that either. But there is much else that we may be told." Throughout the rest of the meal they talked together, but Frodo listened more than he spoke, for the news of the Shire apart from the ring seemed small and far away and unimportant, while Gloin had much to tell of events in the northern regions of Wilderland. "There is much to tell, good and bad," said Gloin, "yet it is mostly good. We have been so far very fortunate, though we do not escape the shadow of these times. If you really wish to hear of us, I will tell you tidings gladly, but stop me when you are weary. Dwarves' tongues run on when speaking of their handiwork, they say." And with that Gloin embarked on a long account of the doings of the Dwarf Kingdom. He was delighted to have found so polite a listener, for Frodo showed no sign of weariness and made no attempt to change the subject, though actually he soon got rather lost among the strange names of peoples and places that he had never heard of before. At length the feast came to an end. Elrond and Arwen rose and went down the hall, and the company followed them in due order. The doors were thrown open, and they went across a wide passage and through other doors and came into a further hall. In it were no tables, but a bright fire was burning in a great hearth beneath the carven pillars upon either side. Frodo found himself walking with Gandalf. "This is the Hall of Fire," said the wizard. "Here you will hear many songs and tales if you can keep awake. But except on high days it usually stands empty and quiet, and people come here who wish for peace and thought. There is always a fire here all year round." As Elrond entered and went towards the seat prepared for him, elvish minstrels began to make sweet music. Slowly the hall filled, and Frodo looked with delight upon the many faces that were gathered together. The golden firelight played upon them and shimmered in their hair. Suddenly he noticed, not far from the further end of the fire, a small dark figure seated on a stool with his back propped against a pillar. Beside him on the ground was a drinking cup and some bread. Frodo wondered whether he was ill, and had been unable to come to the feast. His head seemed sunk in sleep on his breast, and a fold of his dark cloak was drawn over his face. Elrond went forward and stood behind the silent figure. "Awake, little master," he said with a smile. Then turning to Frodo, he beckoned to him. "Now at last the hour has come that you have wished for, Frodo," he said. Here is a friend that you have long missed." The dark figure raised its head and uncovered its face. "Bilbo!" cried Frodo with sudden recognition, and he sprang forward. "Hello, Frodo, my lad," said Bilbo. "So you have got here at last. I hoped you would manage it. Well, well, so all this feasting is in your honour, I hear. I hope you enjoyed yourself." "Why weren't you there?" cried Frodo. "And why haven't I been allowed to see you before?" "Because you were asleep. I have seen a good deal of you. I have sat by your side with Sam each day. But as for the feast, I don't go in for such things now. I had something else to do." "What were you doing?" "Why, sitting and thinking, of course. I do a lot of that nowadays." "Wake up indeed," he said, cocking an eye at Elrond. There was a bright twinkle in it, and no sign of sleepiness that Frodo could see. "Wake up! I was not asleep, Master Elrond." Elrond laughed and withdrew. Frodo and Bilbo sat side by side, and Sam came quickly and placed himself near them. They talked together in soft voices, oblivious of the mirth and music in the hall about them. Bilbo had not much to say of himself. When he had left Hobbiton, he wandered off aimlessly, along the road or in the country on either side, but somehow he had steered all the way towards Rivendell. "I got here without much adventure," he said, "and after a rest I went on with the dwarves to the Dale, my last journey. I shan't travel again now. Then I came back and have been here since. I've done this and that, I've written some more of my book, and of course I've made up a few songs. They sing them occasionally just to please me, I think, for of course they're not really good enough for Rivendell. And I listen, and I think. Time doesn't seem to pass here, it just is. A remarkable place altogether. I heard about the ring, of course. Gandalf has been here. Not that he has told me a great deal. He's become more closed than ever in the last few years. Strider has also told me more. Fancy that ring of mine causing such a disturbance. It is a pity that Gandalf did not know more about it sooner. I could have brought the thing here myself long ago without so much trouble. I have thought several times of going back to Hobbiton for it, but I am getting old, and they would not let me. Gandalf and Elrond, I mean. They seemed to think that the enemy was looking high and low for me, and would make mincemeat of me if he caught me wandering around in the wild. And, Gandalf said, the ring has passed on, Bilbo. It would do no good to you or to others if you tried to meddle with it again. Odd sort of remark, just like Gandalf. But he said he was looking after you, so I let things be. I'm frightfully glad to see you safe and sound. He paused and looked at Frodo doubtfully. "Have you got it here?" he asked in a whisper. "I can't help feeling curious, you know, after all I've heard. I should very much like to see it again just one more time." "Yes, I've got it," answered Frodo, feeling a strange reluctance. "It looks just the same as it ever did." "Well, I should just love to see it for a moment," said Bilbo. When he had dressed, Frodo found that while he had slept, the ring had been hung around his neck on a new chain, light but strong. Slowly he drew it out. Bilbo put out his hand, but Frodo quickly drew back the ring. To his distress and amazement, he found that he was no longer looking at Bilbo. A shadow seemed to have fallen between them, and through it he found himself eyeing a little wrinkled creature with a hungry face and bony, groping hands. The music and singing around them seemed to falter, and a silence fell. Bilbo looked quickly at Frodo's face and passed his hand across his eyes. "I understand now. Put it away. I'm sorry. Sorry you've come in for this burden. Sorry about everything. Don't adventures ever have an ending? I suppose not. Someone else always has to carry on the story. Well, it can't be helped. I wonder if it's any good trying to finish my book. But don't let's worry about it now. Let's have some real news. Tell me all about the Shire." Frodo hid the ring away, and the shadow passed, leaving hardly a shred of memory. The light and music of Rivendell was about them again. Bilbo smiled and laughed happily. Every item of news from the Shire that Frodo could tell, aided and corrected now and again by Sam, was of the greatest interest to him, from the felling of the last tree to the pranks of the smallest child in Hobbiton. They quickly became lost in all the doings of the Four Farthings. After a long while they got up and withdrew quietly into the shadows and made for the doors. Sam had fallen fast asleep, and they left him behind on his stool with a smile on his face. In spite of his delight in Bilbo's company, Frodo felt a tug of regret as they passed out of the hall of fire. Even as they stepped over the threshold, a single clear voice rose in song around them. Frodo halted for a moment and looked back. Elrond was in his chair, and the fire was on his face like summer light upon the trees. Near him sat the Lady Arwen. To his surprise, Frodo saw that Aragorn stood behind her. His dark cloak was thrown back, and he seemed to be clad in elven mail, and a star shone on his breast. They spoke together, and then suddenly it seemed to Frodo that Arwen turned towards him, and the light of her eyes fell on him from afar and pierced his heart. He stood still enchanted while the sweet syllables of an elvish song fell like clear jewels of blended word and melody. "It is a song to Elbereth," said Bilbo. "They will sing that and other songs of the Blessed Realm many times tonight. Come on." He led Frodo back to his own little room. It opened onto the gardens and looked south across the ravine of the Brunnen. There they sat for some while, looking through the window at the bright stars above the steep climbing woods and talking softly. They spoke no more of the small news of the Shire far away, nor of the dark shadows and perils that encompassed them, but of the fair things they had seen in the world together, of the elves, of the stars, of the trees, and the gentle fall of the bright year in the woods. At last there came a knock on the door. "Begging your pardon," said Sam, putting in his head, "but I was just wondering if you'd be wanting anything." "And begging yours, Sam Gamgee," replied Bilbo. "I guess you mean that it is time your master went to bed." "Well, sir, there is a council early tomorrow, I hear, and he only got up today for the first time." "Quite right, Sam," laughed Bilbo. "You can trot off and tell Gandalf that he has gone to bed. Good night, Frodo. Bless me, but it has been good to see you again. I'm getting very old, and I began to wonder if I should ever live to see your chapters of our story. Good night. I'll take a walk, I think, and look at the stars of Elbereth in the garden. Sleep well."